It's pretty typical that runner activity will fluctuate over the lifespan of a speed game. High periods when many people are grinding for PBs and world records, and low periods will naturally happen as people take breaks, burn out, and new runners come into the community. What I want to take a closer look at, though, is a period that doesn't fit quite as neatly into this typical fluctuation. It's this dip here, which is interesting not necessarily because it's the lowest point on this graph, but because what's here should have been a high period. The story on how and why this happened starts about 3 months prior, when one of the Gauntlet record holders, Zet, recorded a short gameplay clip documenting some tech he'd been using that had never been documented before, and that would ultimately change the landscape of Titanfall speedruns drastically. Wait, that's it? No, that can't be the right clip. I mean, he's literally just jumping off the wall. How is this even... What makes this clip interesting from a speedrunner's perspective is not entirely obvious at first if you're not a movement nerd that already studied the frame data for every possible wall interaction. So, to put it bluntly, you're not supposed to get that much speed out of a simple wall jump. What a wall jump should do is apply a simple 12 km/h impulse to your current wall run speed. Wall running alone caps out at around 30 km/h, so just by adding those two numbers together, we've already got the upper limit of how much speed you can have out of a wall jump. And yet, Zed is able to get more than that from wall jumping, which is great, but it's technically not new. It's been known for a long time that with techniques such as edge boosting and end boosting, you could get a similar amount of extra speed from a wall jump. Both of these techniques take advantage of how the game pushes you away from the wall right when a wall run ends. This was presumably implemented so that players wouldn't be able to instantly re-grab the wall after being pushed off to just keep wall running forever. The limitation of edge boosts and end boosts, however, is how specific the conditions are in order to perform them. For an edge boost, you need to jump from a sharp edge in the wall, which comes up less frequently than you may think, and for an end boost, you need to literally wait for the wall run to end automatically. So in most cases, it's simply faster to just jump off the wall immediately and then gain that extra speed by just air strafing. And this is exactly why this clip from Zet is so interesting, because evidently he's neither jumping from a sharp edge in the wall, nor is he waiting for the full 1.75 second wall run timer to run out, and he's still able to get that same boost of the game kicking you off the wall at any point in the wall run. So then what is Zet actually doing? Given that it took this long to discover, it had to be something ridiculously complicated and obscure. Oh, never mind, he's just crouching and jumping at the same time. Titanfall 2 straight up won't let you wall run if you're in a crouch state. If you approach a wall while crouched, instead of running on it, you'll stay in the air with a refreshed double jump along with a small upward bump. This intended interaction is what we call a wall bump, and it's been known about and used as a niche movement option basically since release. The inverse of this, so to speak, is a lot more unassuming. If you crouch while running on the wall, the game will simply kick you off immediately with a small horizontal push directly away from the wall. Very similar to the push we get when the wall run timer runs out and we get kicked off automatically. This little push is so small that it's really easy to dismiss as being insignificant when wall kicks can get you way above the 45 km/h being shown here. It's so easy to dismiss, in fact, that from when this clip was posted, it took another 2 months until people actually realized just how much potential was just sitting here. So we started experimenting, confirming that by crouching and jumping at the exact same time, the wall jump impulse gets combined with the bump from crouching off the wall, resulting in more speed. Now, getting a bit more speed out of a wall jump whenever you want is pretty neat, but the real power of this tech unveils itself when you start to think about how you can get this boost at any point in the wall run. Meaning you can get it right as you touch the wall and immediately jump off, meaning you can combine this tech with wall kicks. Wall kicks are one of the core pieces of movement tech that every runner needs to become proficient at if they want to compete at a high level, because with optimal execution, they allow you to gain speed indefinitely with each successive wall kick. The speed gain from a good wall kick will usually range from 7 to 10 km/h, depending on the timing of the jump as well as the angle at which you're coming into the wall. But if we take the impulse from crouching off the wall and add the two vectors together, we end up with a wall kick that is, along with a slightly different trajectory away from the wall, about 3 km/h faster than a regular wall kick with the same input timing. It's effectively a direct upgrade, so I think you can see why this was a pretty big deal for speedrunners. Not only would this save an enormous amount of time over the course of the 80-minute run from being able to build up and maintain much more speed in pretty much every segment of the game, but it would also allow for a lot of new routing opportunities that were either not possible before or could be modified to prioritize maximizing speed gain over taking a tighter line, for example. Almost immediately, top runners were meeting up in voice chat and labbing out new routes together.
My favorite checks is right checks. Right checks is so much better than wheat checks. Anyone who likes wheat checks is a dumbass.
The Speed Tech Clips channel in the speedrunning Discord was basically flooded with tons of new ideas and movement optimizations utilizing this new tech that we dubbed crouch kicks. It really felt like the door had been opened to a whole new era for Titanfall 2 speedrunning, and excitement for the future of this game was through the roof, which was exemplified by a video that Brian Otto made on the same day that we realized crouch kicks were a thing.
Like, I don't think I've ever seen a Beacon 3 zipless go over like 90 kilometers an hour. And this is just day one. Like, that stuff, I mean, I just learned this today. It's pretty rare that we see something like this in Titanfall where I'm like, oh my god, and I instantly have to make a video about it. Like, literally, I streamed for 10 hours and then got back on my computer and made this video.
But there was a problem. While the discovery would lead to a burst in runner activity and streams, that activity would fade into basically nothing within just a few weeks. Again, it's pretty normal for speedrunning communities to go through low periods where few people are streaming or running, but the fact that it came so soon after a new discovery that was excitedly dubbed Movement Revolution 3.0, almost none of the top runners were streaming or even doing runs offline, even though they were in the lab sharing new routes and ideas just a few weeks ago. Something obviously wasn't right. Alright, that'll work. Someone in the comments told me I should go outside, so. Despite being a very simple input on the surface, we realized very early that crouch kicks were frame perfect, in the sense that you have to press crouch and jump on the same frame. Now that sounds like it shouldn't be a big problem, but what's not entirely obvious from this, and what took us a bit longer to realize, is that this makes the consistency of crouch kicks not only frame rate dependent, but also effectively RNG. See, inputs in Titanfall 2 are read once on every frame. Anytime you press a button, that input will be registered on the next rendered frame. So an input at the very beginning of a frame and an input at the very end of that same frame will end up being processed at the same time. The randomness stems from the fact that it's not really humanly feasible to place an input intentionally at any given point within a single frame. With common modern frame rates, that window is just so small that any input will land in an effectively random spot within that range of human error. Now, the issue with two inputs is that if there is even the smallest delay, only like a few milliseconds between your crouch and jump inputs, there's a chance that you will miss that crouch kick, because it's possible that your first input will land at the very end of one frame, and the second input will land at the very beginning of the next frame, meaning they'll be processed on different frames. This was the heart of the issue with crouch kicks. The potential time save was huge, but the fact that they were effectively random and out of our control made them extremely unfun and frustrating to use. Differences in hardware also seemed to impact the consistency of crouch kicks pretty dramatically. Not only was the discrepancy of success rates among top runners especially much higher than usual when a new piece of tech is introduced, some were able to get them 70% of the time, others had near 100% consistency, and even others could barely hit them half the time. But in one instance, changing keyboards changed the consistency from near 100% to barely being able to hit them 1 out of 5 times.
A few frames of latency. Camera pointed at my hand, I'm looking at the audio waves, I'm listening for when I'm actually pressing the input, I'm taking it down frame by frame in Vegas. This was a bad time.
This really solidified the consensus that crouch kicks were not only frame rate, but also hardware dependent. Things like a desync between the game's frame rate and your keyboard's polling rate, inconsistencies in the polling rate, and even the profile of your keycaps would only serve to exacerbate the problem and drive crouch kicks further and further out of the player's control. This is actually not even the first time something like this has happened. The competitive Melee community has also had a similar problem to this in the form of dashback. In order to go from a standing position into a dash going in the opposite direction, you have to move the analog stick from a neutral position to fully to one side in one frame. The problem here is very similar in the sense that depending on at which point in a frame you start moving the stick, you have a variable amount of time in order to cross over the walking zone of the analog values. And because it's not humanly possible to control when in the frame you start moving the stick, whether or not you will successfully dash back ends up being determined by what is effectively RNG. To really drive this point of randomness home, let me give you a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you're absolutely cracked at the game and can hit normal wall kicks 100% of the time. Let's say you're also really good at minimizing the delay between your jump and crouch inputs and can consistently hit them with a delay of 3 milliseconds. That's a shorter time frame than I can literally even show in this video. At 60 FPS with a frame time of 16.6 milliseconds, that still gives you a 3/16.6 chance of just missing the crouch kick. Because with a delay of 3 milliseconds, you will hit a crouch kick if your first input lands within the first 13.6 milliseconds of that frame. But if it lands on the last 3 milliseconds, with the same inputs and the same timing, you'll miss that crouch kick. In percentages, that's about an 81.9% chance of hitting the crouch kick successfully with a 3 millisecond delay. Alright, that's kind of rough, but 82% chance to hit it successfully doesn't sound too bad, right? I'm not done. Throughout the whole full game any percent run, the amount of wall kicks that are in the standard route is in the ballpark of around 150. If we apply that 81.9% chance to every wall kick, the probability of getting a run where you hit every crouch kick is about that, or about 1 in 5 trillion. Okay, to be fair, the actual probability isn't even that important, because it might as well be 0. The point I'm trying to make is that, unlike with regular wall kicks, which are 100% skill-based, a full run without a single missed crouch kick is simply not possible from a probabilistic standpoint. Instead, every run with that percentage will have about 27 crouch kicks that miss simply due to bad luck. And again, that's with perfectly consistent timing between the button presses on your part. Of course, you can increase the consistency by lowering the frame rate to 30 to increase the frame time. And manipulating frame rates for certain strats isn't an uncommon thing in speedrunning, especially among other Quake Engine derivative games. But that's often specific to certain strats that take up a very small portion of the run compared to, well, movement. With how prevalent wall kicks are in Titanfall, you would effectively have to play at that frame rate for the entire 80-minute run. And I don't know about you, but to me that does not sound or even look like a whole lot of fun. Not to mention that it still doesn't fix the underlying issue of crouch kicks being fundamentally random. So what do we do instead? The mission statement was as follows. Find a way to fix the inconsistency of crouch kicks without affecting the difficulty of their execution, and while avoiding any side effects that could potentially create a whole new set of problems. With that brief, one thing that was ruled out almost immediately was the use of macros, both in hardware and software. The main issue with a hardware macro is that it creates either an accessibility issue where you need a special type of keycap that fits over 2 switches, or requires you to mod your own hardware to physically connect 2 keys in some way. Both of these options were not all that popular, and it didn't seem like the direction the community wanted the run to go in. The feeling was the same with software macros. While they would be a lot more accessible, they're still, well, macros, and simply reduce 2 distinct button presses into 1, making it completely indistinguishable from a normal wall kick in terms of raw execution. The most popular approach by far took a bit of inspiration from how the Melee community handled the randomness of dashback. And that was by introducing a software mod that would subtly tweak some things to make the technique more consistent. In Melee, this was done by increasing the timing window for dashback from 1 frame to 2 frames, and packaging it up as one of the 2 modifications in their now widely used Universal Controller Fix, or UCF. For our mission statement though, this would not be quite good enough, as it could be argued that simply increasing the timing window by a frame makes crouch kicks easier, especially considering that, unlike dashback, crouch kicks aren't an intended mechanic, so we had to approach this a bit differently. So instead of turning a 1-frame technique into a 2-frame technique, Community Big Brain Fizzy proposed the idea of creating a buffer system that would be untied from the frame rate and would also allow us to tune the timing window with millisecond precision. That may sound kind of impossible, but here's how that would work. Anytime either a crouch or jump input is pressed, the buffer will hold onto that input for a certain number of milliseconds. If in that time span the other input is pressed, it will send both inputs simultaneously, guaranteeing that they will be registered on the same frame. If that time span passes and no other input is registered, it simply sends that first input after the buffer period ends. This completely removes the framerate dependency of crouch kicks by basing them on real time and anchoring everything on the moment when the first input is pressed. That way the timing window for crouch kicks can be exactly the same every single time. Now, an important question was, how long should this buffer period be? Because a buffer period longer than 1 frame will not only make crouch kicks easier, but it could also add a noticeable delay to your crouch and jump inputs. Remember, if you're only pressing either jump or crouch, the system will hold on to that input until the buffer period is over and only then send that input. So picking the right length of the buffer period was crucial, as we needed to balance the difficulty, neither making them unrealistic or trivial to perform, as well as the input delay that would come with it. The value we ended up picking was 8 milliseconds, as it would give less than a frame of delay at 60 FPS and 1 frame of delay at 120 FPS, which is low enough to not be noticeable for the vast majority of players. 8 milliseconds is also roughly representative of the average timing window you would have for crouch kicks at 60 FPS, as without the fix, the timing window would have an equal chance of being anything from 0 to 16 milliseconds. Overall, this idea was what got the most support and interest from the community, and it was the approach that would end up being voted on later. But due to the nature of the potential implementation of a gameplay change like this, we had to be sure that there would be no unforeseen consequences that could affect the run in unpredictable ways. So we packaged up a special pre-release of the community speedrunning mod that included this fix, named it the Universal Crouch Kick Fix. Yeah, real subtle reference, I know. And released it so everyone could test it and form their opinion on whether or not they would want this buffer system to be allowed for leaderboard runs. During the official testing period, runners could both get a feel for how crouch kicks felt with and without the fix, spot any bugs in the buffer system, as well as discuss their thoughts and opinions on its potential legality. What was important was that this had to be decided and voted on before the upcoming yearly tournament series Mock March, which would be the biggest community event of the year. Not having a concrete ruling before the beginning of that tournament would likely doom it to the kind of low participation that plagued the community for the past few weeks, which would also not be a good sign for the future. Of course, this buffer system is ultimately a gameplay change, even if it is a very small one. But it did raise the kinds of questions that come along with making a change like this. Is it okay to modify the game for the benefit of speedrunners and standardize playing a version of the game that subtly, but really behaves differently from vanilla? The biggest concern for the community that was discussed by far was the fact that this fix was exclusive to PC, due to there being no way to mod console versions of the game, so calling it a universal fix was definitely not accurate. Historically, the moderator team has put in a lot of effort to try to keep parity between PC and console in terms of their competitive viability. Some examples of that being banning digital analog input emulation and only keeping a very small whitelist of console commands due to them being PC only. Though over time, it's become increasingly obvious that running on PC was simply the better option overall, due to things like faster load times, less punishing checkpoints, the freedom of setting up your binds however you want, and many more quality of life improvements and practice tools. Most console runners would eventually just switch to PC when they had the option to, so the number of people running on console steadily went down over time. So it would become increasingly unreasonable to cater the rule set towards a smaller and smaller part of the community and effectively hold everyone else back to maintain parity. And even though the fix worked for both keyboard and controller, we did end up dropping the universal part from the name. Another big concern was the question of whether or not this buffer lowers the skill ceiling, despite not explicitly making crouch kicks easier. I mean, would it not be better for high-level competition to let people train their fingers to be able to press 2 buttons with absolutely no delay? See, in theory, this should be true, but the problem is that the same fundamental issue of inputs landing in a random spot at a small enough scale extends beyond the frame rate, one layer deeper, to the polling rate. Literally any non-zero delay between your inputs has a chance of landing on 2 different poles of your hardware. That will lock you into a large delay between the inputs when the game actually reads them, which could cause your inputs to land on 2 different frames, even when, if measured by real time, your inputs were actually sent on the same frame. Now, of course, this happening on only 1 crouch kick is pretty rare, but again, if we extrapolate that over 150 wall kicks, it's not unreasonable to think that this will happen at least once or twice in a full game run. Now, I feel like I've been arguing this pretty relentlessly so far, so you might be inclined to think that implementing a mod to change the behavior of your crouch and jump inputs was a pretty controversial idea. So now I might look like a silly little guy saying this, but when the actual vote came around, it was 60 votes in favor and 6 against, which is by far the biggest majority that's happened in a community vote so far. I mean, even the proposal of a cutscene bypass that wouldn't save any in-game time and was purely proposed as a quality of life improvement for runners was more contentious than this. Anyway, what about that tournament I talked about earlier? With the fix now being part of the speedrunning mod, not only had the playing field been leveled so that everyone could consistently perform crouch kicks, but the speed of play also took a significant step up because of this. People were beginning to reach speeds they never had before, and it did a lot for how exciting it was to watch two players go head-to-head in racing individual levels. Rounds were shorter, margins were tighter, and in some ways it was a test to see who could better deal with all of that extra speed. Suffice it to say that Mach 2 March was a success, and a big improvement in terms of competition and the viewer experience. But what happened in the weeks after the tournament is actually even more mind-blowing. Now, before I end up turning this into a world record progression video, I'll keep this one short and just say that the run you're seeing right now is the closest a Titanfall 2 speedrun has gotten to the fabled God run. It beat the previous world record by almost a minute and a half, and almost skipped the 116 barrier while beating 3 individual level world records in the process. I don't feel like I'm exaggerating when I say that this is probably a once-in-a-lifetime kind of run. Now, it's hard to tell exactly how much of that time save is thanks to crouch kicks, due to the fact that they're basically everywhere, but they definitely played a big part in making a run like this possible, and unsurprisingly, this record has stood firmly for a solid 8 months now. Now, what's kind of funny is that while I was making this video, Titanfall 2 has been going through another period of low activity. But I don't think that it's the kind of low period that should be concerning, because it doesn't carry that same baggage of something being wrong with the game that's causing people to not want to run. Instead, what we have right now is kind of the usual. People being preoccupied with other things, or taking breaks, or even trying out other speed games. And even despite that, the Discord is still active with the occasional new routing idea or individual level world record being broken. What's important is that the long-term health of the community stays intact. That has always been one of our biggest priorities when it comes to moderation of the leaderboards, updating the rules, and holding community discussions and votes like this one. Letting the community govern itself and decide the direction they want to take the game and the run in has allowed us to maintain an environment for running the game that not only allows for healthy competition, but also puts having fun with the game at the forefront while doing it. And I think that's ultimately one of the main reasons why it's been able to stick around for as long as it has. Or maybe I'm just coping, I don't know. Hi. Main part of the video is done, by the way, so if you have like places to be, don't let me hold you up. But I did want to take this moment to ramble on about a couple of things. First one being, I've set up a Patreon. I don't do YouTube full-time at the moment, so this is like a super optional thing that I don't rely on. But if you're interested in seeing sort of behind-the-scenes kind of stuff, like screenshots and other kind of semi-regular updates on production, that's where that stuff is. 2 other things I'd like to plug here real quick. Twitter, I post like funny once a month. Here's an example. That's funny. And also my Twitch, where, unsurprisingly, I stream speedruns sometimes, if I feel like it. But yeah, that's now actually it, so thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in 17 years when my next video comes out.